Hey everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial. In this video, you're going to learn how to use attribute directives in Angular with a really good example, which is going to be fun as well. If you don't know who I am Ahsan, and I'm a Google developers expert in Angular for the past 3 years. And I'm also the author of the Angular cookbook. You're going to see that later at the end. So attribute directives are the ones which are applied as an attribute to the HTML elements, and they can do multiple things. And in this video, we are going to use a search input to highlight text into a paragraph or a given text inside a particular HTML elements. So without further ado, let's get started. So first of all, you need to make sure that you have the Angular CLI installed globally within your machine, and you can check it by typing ng version or ng -- version. And if you don't have that installed, you can quickly do that by running the command npm install -g add angular/cli. So I already have the latest version, so I don't have to worry about it. Let's create a new Angular application. So to create an Angular application, we'll do ng new, and then we'll give this a name. So let's say highlight attribute directive. And then what we can do is that we can also say that we are going to use the styles, and the styles are going to be SCSS, or actually style. And once we do so, this creates a new Angular application for us that we can begin working with. It's asking for me to choose if I want to use Angular routing. I don't want that. Let's just wait now until this installation is completed, and we'll continue after that. Alright, so now that we have the application created, let's open it into VS Code. So I'm going to just say code, and then I'm going to give this the folder, and this should open this into VS Code. And then we can use VS Code built-in terminal to execute the other commands as well. If you don't know how that works, you can simply open VS Code and go to terminal, and here you can do a new terminal, and then this should open this terminal for you. Now, in order to run this application, we can just say ng-serve. Now remember that when we created this application, it also installed all of the dependencies. So we just need to run the ng-serve command, and this will build up the application and essentially serve this on localhost 4200. So let's check that out. So this is the application that it creates out of the box with a couple of HTML and CSS. You can see that it's working on localhost 4200. But I want to get rid of all of this. So essentially I'm going to go into my code, and inside I'm just going to go to source index.html, and actually inside app component HTML. So here, and all we need to do is that we need to get rid of all the code apart from the header itself. So I'm going to keep this toolbar, but apart from that, everything inside the content goes away. So let me quickly do that. And I'm also going to remove all this from here, this comment here, and then probably everything that is up top as well. So we only need the toolbar, nothing else. So I'm going to remove everything that we have in content from here all the way here. And let's see how our application looks like now. So as you can see, we only have the toolbar left, and we have the body here. So what we are going to do here is that we are going to have an input and some text, and our input is going to be the search input. So whenever we type something in that search bar, it should essentially find every instant of this query within the article. So in order to just make the styling easier, I'm going to be using Bootstrap. So let me quickly go ahead and add Bootstrap to the project. So in order to add the Bootstrap, I'm using the CDN links for that. So I need to go to index.html, and here I just need to add the link tags, and essentially I'm using Bootstrap as well as the font awesome icons, so I can show the search icon within the view as well. Now let's create the HTML for the search input and for the text as well. So here in the app component, I'm just going to go inside content, and here first I'm going to add the input group. This is where our input and the icon would reside. Then I use input group prepend because I want to show the search icon before the input itself. Then I'm going to add the icon search, and then I'm going to add the input which just says search text. And finally we need the text which we are going to search within using this input. So I'm going to create a p tag with the class text content, and here I create the text that we are going to work with. So let's check this out. And I also want to make sure that this code is quite in the middle of the screen. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to check this out first in the browser. So here you can see that we have the toolbar, but also we have this input going all the places. So let's fix that really quick. I'm going to go to the styles, and here you can see that the toolbar has a position absolute. So I'm going to fix that by removing the position absolute, just like this. So in the browser now you can see that this looks a bit better. Now let's make sure that this whole content is in the middle. So we are going to use the Bootstrap class container for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and add the class container to the content element, and here I'm also going to find the content styles per se, and also make sure that it has the bottom, or actually the top margin margin as well. So we are going to say content, and here I'm going to say margin top is going to be something like 40 pixel. In the browser now you can see that this looks much better. Now the thing is that we need to create the attribute directive in order to make sure that if we type the word the in here, for example, then it highlights every instance of the word the within this whole text. How do we do that? The approach that I'm going to use is that I'm going to replace the words with a custom HTML element which has the style of a background color, which means that every instance of the word the in this case will be replaced by an HTML. So for that, first we need to make sure that we are able to connect this input with this directive that we are going to create, and of course we need the directive to be created. So in order to create a directive in Angular, it's actually pretty easy. I would not want to close this server, so I'm going to create a new terminal here, and then we are going to just say ngg directive, which means that Angular generate a directive for me, and I'm going to call this app highlight, or actually highlight, but I don't want to create that in the app folder, but rather I want to create this in the directives folder. So I will say directives, and then I can say highlight. Now if I run this with dry run, see what happens. So if I run this with dry run, this will essentially show me what would have happened if I executed this command in real. So it would create two files inside the source app directives folder, which does not exist right now, but it will create it for me, and then it will also update the app module to essentially register this directive into the module itself. Now you can see that since we ran it with the dry run flag, there were no changes made to the disk. So I'm going to run this without the flag now. This should essentially create a directive for us and also update the app module for us, registering that directive. So if I go to this folder, you can see that we got the directive. This is essentially the code for the directive itself. It's called app highlight because every directive that we create is prefixed this word, and then inside the app module you can see that this highlight directive is now also registered inside the declarations. So that is essentially what we wanted. Now in order to pass the value of the input to this directive, we need two steps. Number one, we need to make sure that we capture the value of the input somewhere in the app component. The second one is that we need to make sure that this highlight directive accepts that value as a child. So here I'm gonna go and inside the app component and create a new property. We are going to call it search text. This is going to be an empty string in the beginning. Now in order to bind this search text value or variable with this HTML, what we need is something called the ng model directive, and in order to use that we need to use the forms module, otherwise it doesn't work. So what we need in the end is to use something like this. So we should be able to say something like ng model, and here we should be able to say search text. Now you can see that this is all red because it doesn't recognize what this model is. So what we need to do is that we need to go to app module, and here in the imports array we need to say something like forms module, and when we import this you can see that the app component HTML is now happy. It doesn't complain for anything. Now that we have this value here, we need to pass this to our directive, and in order for this directive to accept this value, this has to create an input. So I'm going to create that input now, and this is going to use the input decorator from the Angular core. So here I'm going to just say this is going to be called highlight text, and this is going to be empty in the beginning. Right now the next thing that we want to do is that we need to pass the search text variable from the app component, which is right here, to this directive. But even before that we need to essentially apply this directive to our HTML. So what we will want to do is that we need to search the particular query within this text content, right? And in order to pass this value, or in order to access this text content, this directive has to be applied right here on this p tag. Now this means that as soon as I do this, I should be able to see this directive working. How do we test this out? We can simply do a console.log here, and let's say we say hello, and if you try this on the browser, this should log. So here I'm gonna go and do inspect, and in the console you can see that we see this message hello, and this is coming from the highlight directive because this is now applied on this text. Now in order to make sure that when we change this input, or we actually get the value of the input when it changes, we need to implement a lifecycle in this directive that we call the on changes lifecycle. So we are going to say something like implements on changes, and this is also imported from Angular core. This means that we need to essentially create a function that we call ng on changes, and inside here we are going to have the changes. So we are going to call this simple changes, and we are going to say simple changes, or we could also call them changes, doesn't matter whatever you call this. So let's say we call changes. Now the thing is that this simple changes, now this changes essentially detects if any of the inputs have changed their value, or in the parent the value changed and now it's reflecting here in the child as well. By that I mean if we change the value of the search text by typing something in the input, this place here is going to be be triggered immediately. So here we can first check the value of it. So the way to do that is first we do something like if changes, or actually we can do a simple console.log changes. So now that we have done this, we essentially need to pass the value now. So I'm going to go to the HTML, app component HTML, and here when it says app highlight, I'm going to add an attribute directive, or not the attribute directive, but the input as an attribute. So here I'm going to say something like highlight text, and this input is going to contain the value of the search text variable that we have here. So this means that I'm passing the value of the search text from here to here as this input. Now if we save this and try this on the browser, let's see what happens. So here now if I type, let's say you see that it got 3 logs for every word that I type. If I remove anything, you can see that it also shows the outputs. Now let's see what this contains. So if I open this, you can see that we have the highlight text property here, but inside here we have 3 things. We have the current value of it, we have the previous value, and it shows if this was the first change or not. Now what does this first change mean? If I refresh now, see that we already got a log here for the same thing. So if I go here where this logged, it is inside the ng on changes. Now if I open this, you will see that this says that it is the first change because it's true, because the app just refreshed, so it is normal. The previous value was undefined because we didn't change anything. The current value is empty string, and the reason for that is in our code we are assigning this to the empty string right here. That is where it gets it from. Now if I change anything, this first change true will be false. So let's say if I type a here and open this, you can see that the previous value was empty string, the current value is now a, but the first change is false. So that makes sense. Now that we know that we are changing the value whenever the search input is changing, all we need to do is to now replace the text or the instances of our query with some HTML that has a background. So in order to do so, I'm going to go to my highlight directive, and first we need to get access of the element itself, which means we need to get access to this p tag so we can get out this text per se. So we are going to go to this highlight directive, and then here we are going to first check if it contains a value or not, because it's important that we first identify if the search input is empty or not. So we are going to say something like if, or let's take the value out just like this. So we are going to say const current value, and here we are going to say changes, and then here we can say highlight text. So this way we get the value of the highlight text in the current value. If the current value exists, then what we need to do is that we need to create a regex first based on the input that we have got. So we are going to say const regex, and here we are going to say new regular expression, and then here we need to create that regular expression. So first of all, we need to create a group, because when we create a group in regex, we can access that variable, or not the variable, we can access whatever is found within that group into a variable later on. And let me show you how that works. So first of all, we need to group this, and then we are going to use the current value. Let's say if I type the word the, then it would be the word the, that's going to be the regex here. Then what I'm going to do is that as the second parameter of this regex method, I'm going to use 2 flags, g and I. The g flag stands for global, which means that it's not going to stop at the first occurrence of it, and the I word stands for case insensitive, so it can find the words regardless of the case sensitivity. So now that we have got the regex created, all we need to do is we need to access the element and then replace its HTML. In order to actually get the element, what we need to do is that we need to use a service that is called element ref. So we are going to say private element, and then we are going to call this element ref, and let's actually log this here. So we are going to say this.l, and we are going to just do a console log, and here we can say this.l. Now if I save this and try this on the browser, let's see what happens. So if I refresh now, you see that we got some errors, but if we ignore that, you can see that here we got the element ref. If I open this, you can see that it highlights the p with the class text content, so we got the element. Now let's see what it says. So it says cannot destructure the property of change highlight as it is undefined. That is fine, because the first time it's undefined, so let's fix that. The reason we are having this issue here is that the wording here is incorrect, which means that I need to see the typo. So this is highlight text, we got to fix that to say highlight text. We are also going to fix this as well, and then we are also going to fix the HTML as well. So let's quickly fix that. Now that we have this, let's try this out. So in the browser, if I refresh, you see that we don't have any issues whatsoever. And now that we have got the element, let's replace its HTML with our custom HTML. So in my code, now that we have got the regex, I'm just going to say something like this dot element dot native element dot inner HTML equals, and then I'm going to say this dot element dot native element dot inner HTML dot replace. Since we are replacing this, we are going to use the regex here, and then here we are going to provide the element that we are going to replace it with. So we are just going to replace every word or every match that we find defined with this span, and this span can simply have the style background, and then we are going to say yellow. We could also use background color to be exact, so let's say background color is going to be yellow. And then here what we can do is the group thingy that I talked about, so we can say backslash and then dollar and then 1, and then this will essentially show the matching word right here right now. So let's try this out, save this and see what happens. So in order to test this, I'm just going to type the word the here and then cut this and then paste it here, and now you can see that we actually got the matches. Super cool, right? So if I see what's happening here is that if I see the P element, you see that inside the P element we have all text here, but when it comes the word the, then we replace this with this span. The rest of the words are simple as characters, but any instance of the word the is essentially an HTML element with the particular style that we have given this, right? Super cool. But we have a problem. The thing is that if I try to search farther now, because it also contains the word the, let's see what happens. So if I paste this here, it doesn't work. And the reason is that when we searched the word the, it essentially replaced this whole HTML and included this style here. So now that we have this, we cannot find the word farther because they are not a single word now. It is included in the HTML. Now there are two ways to do this. One, we don't rely on the inner HTML and we go and use the text content, which is perhaps the easier way. The second way is that we make sure that we have the original string saved already in the directive somewhere in the beginning, and then we always replace the original HTML and not the modified HTML at all, because right now whenever we try replacing something, we use the modified HTML. So let's use the approach number 2 right now. So I'm going to go in my code, and here first we need to make sure that we save the original HTML in the code. So we are going to create a property for this. We are going to call this original HTML, and here this is going to be an empty string, of course. Now when the on changes triggers for the first time, we need to capture this value. So we are going to go here and then we are going to check out the first change, and then here we are going to say if this is the first change, then we need to store this value. So we are going to say this dot original HTML equals this dot element dot native element dot inner HTML. And now that we have got this, we just can return from here, because in this case, or from the first change, we don't need to execute anything, right? Now that we have got this, we need to use the original HTML every time. So instead of this inner HTML or the element dot native element dot inner HTML, I'm just going to use this dot original HTML, and we replace this every single time. Now that we have this, let's try this out. So here I'm going to repeat the same use cases. I'm going to type the word the, and then I'm going to paste this. Everything works flawlessly. Now I'm going to copy the word farther, and if I paste this here, boom, that works. And the reason is that right now when we did a replace, we essentially replaced using the original string. So now you can see that there's only one match here, so one span inside. But if I type the word the, you see that now we got a lot of spans right here for every word or for every match. Super cool, right? So we fixed the issue that we were talking about earlier. Now there's just one issue, and the issue is that if I remove this word the, nothing happens. We still see the highlighted text. Why? Because we don't have this logic of what happens when the input is empty. And the reason is this code. So here we have this check that if we have a current value, then we do something. But what if there isn't any value? We don't do anything in that case. So here we need to have an else block, and here we just need to reverse this logic, which means that if we don't have anything in the input later on, then we need to reset the inner HTML with the original HTML. So we can do simply this, and then we can remove this. And this means that now if I empty the input, then it's going to reset to its original value. So in the browser, let's try this. So if I type the, you can see that we get something. If I type farther, we also get something. But if I remove this, you see that now all the highlights are gone. And if we want to inspect this, you will see that inside this p tag, we only have the text and there is no HTML element right there. And you can see that this is pretty smooth. I could type t, you see all the highlighted content there. I could type the, whatever, and this would work for all the use cases. Now I think that this just needs one little improvement, and that is that we should be able to say what color do we want for the highlighting. And in order to do so, we just need to replace this yellow with the desired color. So what I'm going to do is that first I'm going to remove these logs from here. We don't need them anymore. And then I'm going to create an input here. So the parent component can pass the color if they want to. So I can say input, and then here I can say highlight color, and here it's going to be yellow by default. So it still works according to our previous code. So here I'm just going to replace this with highlight color. All right, and actually this is going to be this dot highlight color, and this would still work the same. And now if I go into app.component.html, here I can now pass a highlight color. So I can say highlight color, and here I can say, let's say green. So if I say green, then let's see what happens. So now if I try typing something, you see that now we get the color as well. Now this is just the background color that we are talking about, but we could also give things like padding, text color, and whatnot. You could play around with it and improvise as you want. But there's one thing that I want you to notice: the way that I'm passing the attributes to this directive. This one essentially has this square bracket notation, but this one does not. And the reason is that here I'm using a variable, but this is essentially a string. So we don't need to be too complex when it comes to just using a string. If I wanted to use the bracket scenario, then that would mean that instead of considering this value a string, this would consider this a JavaScript expression, which means that now I have to use the quotation mark to tell Angular that this is a string, right? Similarly, if I wanted to remove these square brackets from here, that would mean that now this would consider this search text as a string and not the variable that we are using right here. So in order to fix that, I would have to use these curly braces, and now this would be exactly the same. Now this is a property, a variable considered by Angular. So we could do those two things. My preference for variables usually is to use square brackets, but when it comes to strings, I essentially use the simple notation that we want. And that's essentially it for this video. I hope that you liked the video and enjoyed it. If you did, press the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And if you want to see more premium content that you can use to actually elevate your Angular skills, I can show you something really cool. This Angular cookbook, this has been getting really good response from the community, and it has gone really good with the sales as well. So if you want to level up your skills, I would highly recommend getting this. I'm the one who wrote it, so you can probably trust me. Now, apart from that, you can let me know in the comments if you want me to talk about something specific in Angular. And I also stream on Twitch every Wednesday and Saturday, so you can also chime in and see me live coding, hang out with the community and whatnot. Until the next time, happy coding, and watch this next video.